Hey Burns, how are you today?
Doing okay, Dick. How about you?
Well, I'm really concerned with the economy. First of all, you got Biden bouncing around with spending God knows how many trillion. And then, here in Hawaii, there are, help wanted signs everywhere, but nobody seems to want to take them. And then you got the people that work at the hotel and the service industry, which is basically how we operate around here, and they would like their job back, but 70% haven't gotten their job back. I just don't have a clue what's happening. It's unbelievable. You want a job, you can't have it, and yet I want to hire you.
So, dare I ask what you suspect is the issue?
Well, I don't know what the issue is because it doesn't make sense.
Well,
I,
you live in a state controlled by Democrats. That should be kind of you know, a string you can pull on.
well, yeah, but you would think since we basically run on a service economy, we don't really produce anything. You would think that wouldn't happen, and yet it's happening, and there's no logic behind it. That's issue number one. But issue number two is with all this money Biden wants to dump into the economy, it's only going to be inflation. It's just like if you raise the minimum wage to $15, then prices will go up by whatever amount. I was looking at McDonald's, for example. A McDonald's Big Mac over here is now $7.99. $7.99 for a McDonald's Big Mac. And I'm going, this is absolutely ridiculous. Don't people realize that if you keep on jacking up wages and spending money, it's just going to be inflationary and you're going to end up paying the difference?
Well, our inflation rate right now is, I think, order of magnitude about somewhere between 5.5, 5.9%, and still climbing. I think it's reportedly the worst inflation in 30 years. And meanwhile, back at the ranch, Biden's throwing money at everything. And it's not the kind of money that quote unquote primes the pump. It's mostly various forms of welfare, as well as, the projects that are supposed to help with climate change. And you recall how successful Obama was at that. He threw money at any number of companies, working on that, and without effect and without anything concrete being developed. But climate change is just kind of a flash word or phrase that if they scare enough people, they feel like they can, get away with huge appropriations because we've got to save the planet, as if the planet has never gone through cycles of change over, countless millennia.
Well, yeah, but that's interesting. But what bothers me is our climate is getting screwed up, and I'm talking about our climate here in Hawaii. It used to be lower 80s. Now it's like lower 90s every day, and it's if we didn't have air and all the other stuff, it'd be very very difficult to live here. But what gets me about all these different ideas is none of them have fixed any of the issues. Throwing money at stuff doesn't help, and it doesn't accomplish anything. I heard on the news today that Biden's actions are the greatest since Roosevelt's New Deal. And I'm going, then why isn't it working?
Well, number one, I'm not a fan. Many historians are not as well of Roosevelt's New Deal. Most historians have come to the conclusion that Roosevelt threw money left and right to bring us out of the Great Depression. And what really brought us out of the Great Depression was World War II. So I
Sure.
think Roosevelt and LBJ, who is Roosevelt on steroids with his Great Society, really didn't accomplish anything other than increasing the welfare rolls. I mean, that kind of money is not, like capital investment in industry that develops products, develops services, and grows prosperity. I think the classic example of big government, which is what we have, throwing money at something without success whatsoever, is education. I mean, we hear that year in, year out. One of the things the Democrats like to do is they raise big appropriations for education, throw money at the schools. Much of that goes into the teachers' unions, who in turn give a portion of that money back to Democratic candidates, whether they be new candidates or incumbents. So it's kind of, keeping the money within the Democratic Party, but it comes out of taxpayers, including Republicans, independents, and so forth. And another example, Dick, is just this week, Biden has proposed $1 million per family for every illegal alien family that during Trump's 4 years in office, he deported. So think about all the Americans that are going without, and Biden and the Democratic Party continues to worry about illegal aliens. I mean, it's bad enough they're crossing the border and bringing disease into the country. A certain portion of them, terrorists or gang members, people illiterate in their own language, who immediately go on, the federal rolls, the so-called safety net. And that's not the government giving them anything. That's you and I being ripped off. Their hands, the government's hands, are in our pockets. Our job is to support our family and our communities. It shouldn't be to support Mexico, Venezuela, and all the various Latin America, South America. Well, I shouldn't confine it to that anymore, because now we have Haitians and we have Afghans, and I know the Chinese are coming in through the southern border. I mean, it's kind of, our southern border is kind of a United Nations of euphemistically called immigrants, but people who aren't following the federal process. And we've talked about that before. And virtually all are unskilled. Now, how's that helping the economy? Other than somebody will be able to get their lawn mowed.
Hey, you just triggered a thought that I was thinking. Part of Biden's plan is a billionaire's tax or a millionaire's tax. I'm not sure if we're millions or billions. Which, by the way, drives me batshit. But what do you think about that? Isn't that the answer? We'll just take the money from the Henry Fords and the Carnegies and the Pierpoint Morgans of today and make them pay for it.
They're already paying for it. 6 of 10 adult Americans do not pay $1 in federal income tax. And I'll probably misquote this. I won't be far off, but the top 1% of earners in the country, which certainly includes what you're talking about, the wealthiest people, account for something like 85 to 90% of our tax revenues. So the Democrats try to dupe John Q. Public into thinking that these people are not paying their fair share based on their wealth, when in point of fact they are. And secondly, these are the people, not all, but for the most part, that run companies, develop wealth through job creation. If you go back and think about the Carnegies and so forth, the Fords, the Democrats would call them robber barons, but a hell of a lot of people got to work and make a pretty good living. So I for one, I think we'd be better off closing tax loopholes than to raise taxes on the wealthy, however we define the wealthy. Right now, Biden, I'll be quick here, Dick. Biden's got a new project. He comes up with, a couple dozen a day. The lefties put it on his desk and he signs it without even reading anything. But that they want to tax people of a certain income level, the wealthy, on their stock gains, but they're stock gains on paper, not stock gains at time of sale. So that's opening up a whole new Pandora's box. And believe me, anything that they do to the quote unquote 1%ers, they'll eventually do in some way, shape, or form to the general public, the middle income taxpayer. And that's been proven through history. This just gets them in the door with a concept.
You mentioned something earlier when we were offline about apparently a Biden plan to tax the shippers that are piled up in the harbor. And I found that really fascinating because the issue becomes if they can't unload, it's not their fault.
It's I mean, to me, if I understand it, I've got to say that when you read an article in a country devoid of true journalism, you have to be a little circumspect about what you're reading. But I mean, they're saying that Biden thinks if you fine the shippers, these steamship lines, that somehow that'll induce them to get their act together logistically to get in and out of the ports in a timely manner. But what are they supposed to do to avoid a fine? Crash the port? I mean, it's idiocy.
Okay, then I had the brilliant idea just increase rail use. And you said,
well, that's a fair-minded solution, but at delivery, you still have to use local drayage companies to move the freight from the rail yard, to where you're delivering it to, stores, warehouses, it's, et cetera. I mean, eventually everything moves by truck in this country.
Master, I have mail for you.
Okay,
But you and I talked last week about basically two things. One, put this thing on a war footing, bring in drivers from the military and the National Guard to help alleviate the issue of the current driver shortage, at least for an interim period, to clear these docks. And the other thing we talked about is, instead of just opening the southern border to the unwashed masses without any real benefit to the country other than new voters for the Democratic Party, which is really the impetus for opening the borders, why not fine tune our immigration policy based on skill sets we need in the economy, one of which right now is Class 1 commercial truck drivers.
well, we talked about that last week, and that's the way the policy used to be. It was strictly skill set
Right,
delineated.
right. And I haven't seen or read about the military getting involved yet,
Well,
nor have I heard anything about getting foreign truck drivers over here, and perhaps with incentives.
well, using the military is a problem because, in theory, even though they can be nationalized, which people don't bother to mention, it would be up to each state governor to determine whether or not he was going to, put drivers in trucks. But remember, I said, if they're nationalized, that becomes a moot issue. The other thing, and the easy answer would seem to be, is to just use normal active duty military truck drivers and put them on the job. I haven't really looked into it, but it seems plausible. We have to look at thinking outside the box, and nobody's doing that.
Well, I mean, who is we or I beat up on Buttigieg last week because he's the do-nothing cabinet member, director of transportation, or secretary of transportation. He doesn't know a damn thing about transportation. And outside of making a few speeches, I believe he's still at home taking care of the 2 infants with his husband. If you look at the southern border fiasco, shortly after Biden took office, changed the policy, defied federal immigration law. I want to repeat that. We have a chief executive of the United States who, in taking his oath of office, is not executing the laws of the land. Among them are federal immigration laws. He's just opened up the southern border. And so when that started blowing up in his face, he deftly gave it to a handoff to Kamala Harris. And Kamala Harris hasn't done a damn thing. And if the vice president of the United States is a do nothing, what do you think most of the other cabinet members are that, Biden's appointed? You don't open the paper every day and get a sense that people in charge are actively doing things other than pushing a left-wing agenda. They're more concerned about pronouns and transgender rights and climate change. You know, you talked about it's getting hotter in Hawaii. I don't deny that, but the issue is that just a cycle the planet Earth is going through, or is that man-made? And that's where the debate ought to lie is, are we causing it, or is it just one of Earth's cycles? And
Well, I think that's a valid point, because if you look over history, we've had ice ages and this type of stuff over and over. I think the last ice age was what, 10,000 years ago?
I'm sure we had them before man was even on the planet. So who do we blame then? Protozoa?
I don't know. It's so depressing, because I look back to the 50s and the 60s, and you pointed it really out well, and that is, the war got the economy and everything else going. And that's true. And then you had the different GI bills, and that did a lot. But that whole attitude is gone. I can't imagine somebody saying, I can't live, but I don't want to work. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what happened to the American work ethic. But Biden's when you have a president in the Oval Office who doesn't have a work ethic, that's a sorry statement to get the economy rolling and people getting back to work after the pandemic and the various restrictions that were placed on the American worker. I read a statistic that since he's been in office, which has been 9 months, he has spent 40% of his time away from the White House. And most of that 40% has been at one of his homes in Delaware, or in some instances out at Camp David. I don't think he has the mental acuity to be a hard-charging, hard-working president. And I don't think when the ball was handed off to him from Donald Trump, it's undeniable. We were energy independent, and now we're not. And now in most states, with gasoline's anywhere from $5 to $7 a gallon, depending on where you live.
Well, I filled up yesterday, and it was $5, and where I can normally fill up for $25, $25 bought me a third of the tank. But I want to bring up another point which really gets me. And that is what people don't seem to realize with all these giveaway programs, and that's really what they are. They're programs you didn't earn. And the problem becomes is once they go into effect, the expectation and the reality is they have to continue or everything crashes.
Yeah, well, the draw right now, the Democrats would like to have you believe that the thousands of people coming across the southern border are all legitimate refugees. They're not. But even if they were, we can't take every bona fide refugee from countries around the world, and then on top of taking them, support them. But that's what the Democrats want to do, and the Democrats aren't supporting them. You know, we are, the taxpayers. You know, if we go through a litany of what has gone awry since Biden took office, I mean, it's as long as both your arms. The State Department has now acknowledged that they're finding more and more Americans who are still stuck in Afghanistan, who want out. And, you know, Joe Biden's over in Europe. I think he's over there for about 2 to 3 weeks, hobnobbing with the people who fly in you know, private jets.
No, he's only there for 5 days.
Oh, okay. I thought it was weeks. Whatever. I mean, with all the things that have gone awry here in this country, and let's just talk about domestically, you know, what's he doing over there? He's not going to get China to change. You know, their issues related to environmental impact and climate change, they're notorious for that. And he should be here leading the charge. And in his absence, there should be somebody capable. And don't anybody try to convince me that Kamala Harris is capable. I mean, she's not, and the Democrats even know it. They're having the media cover it up. But she doesn't know what she's doing.
Okay, let me close this out with a tirade on China. First of all, my great-grandfather was an ambassador to China in the 20s and brought in Chinese students to Cornell, which he was also in charge of. You know, people don't seem to realize that with the Burma Road and everything else, we saved China's butt during World War II. Now, we're sitting here going, they've got a hypersonic missile, maybe, in which case, oh God, you know, we've got nothing that can shoot them down. How did we get to this point? I mean, how did China become what some call our greatest adversary?
Well, I remember, just, this is off the top of my head, and just so our listeners know that I don't just pick on Democrats. I mean, it was the Bushes as presidents borrowed heavily from China. China was holding a lot of notes on us. How can you run an effective foreign policy and deal with what has legitimately become our new Cold War adversary, whereas Russia used to be, is definitely China, when China has, you know, funded our debt, which is now, I believe, $29 trillion. And if Biden gets the infrastructure bill and the bill they call Build Back America, or as it's commonly called, the reconciliation bill, and they've been negotiating that down. That's a trick, by the way, of both the parties. That the reconciliation bill was $3.5 trillion. And so let's just say, for argument's sake, it passes and it's they tell us it's 2 trillion. So then they want to convince us they've really done a job for us we shouldn't be passing a $2 trillion bill right now. It's nonsense.
I agree.
But anyways, and there's also, I'm not saying I know this for a fact, but you have Joe Biden's son's connection to China. And that thing hasn't been explored as much as it should. I mean, the Republicans tried to make a campaign issue out of it in the last presidential run, but the mainstream media the legacy media covered it up pretty good. So Hunter Biden is still receiving money from China. And
we're out of time.
already?
Yes.
By the way, can I get in the last just quickie?
Sure. I've always liked quickies.
The Pope has just come out with another one of his pronouncements that walls should come down, borders should open up, and we meaning the countries of the world should no longer be committed to a nationalist perspective. Nationalism should go by the wayside. And I have a question both as a political observer and as a Catholic. When is that big, tall, sturdy wall going to come down around the Vatican?
I don't know.
Well, I haven't seen the wall coming down, and the woke Pope has just pronounced Joe Biden after an hour and a half meeting with our addled president that he's a good Catholic. And he's one of the greatest proponents of abortion, including late-term abortion, who's ever occupied the White House. Those are my final comments. What I'm trying to say in that is it's all gone to hell in a handbasket.
Okay, I'll see you next week then.
Okay, you take care, Dick.
Thanks, same to you.
Bye-bye.